Welcome to Point to Point channel. So today I will discuss about Spring Boot unit testing and integration testing concepts. So what's the difference between unit testing versus integration testing, and say Spring Boot starter test dependency and its transfer dependencies. Okay, so and what exactly at the rate Spring Boot test does internally. Okay, and with respect to unit testing, why we use at the rate WebMVC test. Okay, for controllers, and at the rate data JPA test for repositories. Okay, so JUnit 4 versus JUnit 5, what's the difference? And so at the rate mockbean versus at the rate spybean, and similarly, what's the difference between at the rate mock versus at the rate spy? And usually real-time issues or concerns and the resolutions also I'm going to discuss. Okay, so yeah, Spring Boot starter test. Yeah, so before discussing about Spring Boot starter test, so just let me explain about a Spring test framework. Okay, so I mean when we were using the own Spring framework without Spring Boot. Okay, so at that time we used to have a Spring test dependency, and you know so with the help of JUnit 4. Okay, JUnit 4, we used to trigger the test cases with the help of Spring Test Context Framework. So, and so there, whenever we are triggering the test case, so internally it used to read the configuration files with the help of some @@ context configuration. So there used to give your path of your configuration files. So by that way, it will configure the required beans over there. Okay, and you need to specify @ run with the spring runner class, right? So like this, I mean, we used to write the test cases when we were using the Spring framework. Now, now in the case of Spring Boot, okay, so Spring Boot, what they have given, Spring Boot has given n number of starter dependencies for each and every requirement. In a similar way, Spring Boot has given a one more dependency, exclusive test dependency for writing test cases. So that is Spring Boot starter test. Okay, now it's enough to add the single dependency in your Spring Boot projects, that is Spring Boot starter test. Okay, so as soon as you add this dependency, internally it has many transitive dependencies as per your Spring Boot version. Okay, so now what and all it consists of internally, so it consists of JUnit framework and Spring test. Anyhow, Spring test is a core module, right? So Spring test is required, and SHJ, for writing the assertions. So whenever you write any test case, obviously at the end of the test case, we need to validate, some field values or some object data. So whether it is true or false, or whether it is equals or not equal. So all such kind of assertions we do with the help of this SHJ library, right? And similarly Hamcrest. So Hamcrest, usually it consists of matcher objects. So matcher objects, in the sense, I mean, it used to say, uh, you know so whatever your list is there, whether that list really consists of so and so objects or not. Okay, and you can while invoking few methods, you can pass some kind of matches. Okay, okay, any int or any value, any string or something like that. So that is Hamcrest, and the second one is Mockito. Mockito is a framework where, whenever you are writing unit test case, obviously the subsequent layer, so you are not going to invoke any methods of your subsequent service. You are going to mock that particular service. So why we do mocking? I mean, obviously, so I mean, so with the help of mocking, we do some stubbing methodology. So that means if I invoke so and so method, so and so will be the return value. So something like that, we will just inform to our unit testing. So by that way, whenever it encounters that particular condition, so it will just return your mock value. Okay, so that's a kind of a mockito. Okay, and similarly JSON asset in the sense where, so for example, if you have JSON response whenever you invoke a get call, REST get call, so obviously then you need to, you know validate your JSON object with the help of this JSON asset. Okay, similarly JSON path. So JSON path also, if you want to validate your JSON object values, then we will take the help of this JSON path. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that this Spring Boot starter test dependency consists of all these transfer dependency which are required to proceed for your unit testing and as well as integration testing. Okay, so so this is one thing. Okay, yeah, now we will discuss about at the rate Spring Boot test. So uh, like this is a first and foremost annotation which you should know before writing your unit testing or integration testing. So so at the rate Spring Boot test, so this particular one, this particular annotation mainly represent, okay, when you are writing a integration testing. So if you want to write integration testing, then you should use this at the rate Spring Boot test. So okay, the next point, what it does internally. So when as soon as you add at the rate Spring Boot test, okay, and whenever you try to run one particular test scenario internally, what it does, okay, it will start searching for your at the rate configuration related file or at the rate Spring Boot application. So yeah, so it will just start searching from all the packages wherever it find at the rate configuration or at the rate Spring Boot application, then it will try to initiate the application context with all the whole application context with all the required beans which should be registered with your application context. Okay, so if you want to say in a single line, at the rate Spring Boot test, okay, will initiate whole application context with all the beans instantiation which are registered with your application context. Okay, so here you can see as per my slide. Okay, so here you can see, because by default it scans and loads the whole application context and all Spring Boot related auto configurations. Yeah, so this is important. So it will not only take care of this beans instantiation, okay, with your application context, and it will also take care of auto configurations, right? The main benefit of Spring Boot applications is auto configuration. So I mean, so it will, based on the jars which are available in your class path, it will take care of auto configuration also, and as well as your beans instantiation also, right? So to say in a single word, so whenever you add at the rate Spring Boot application, whatever it does internally, more or less it will do the almost the same thing even with your Spring Boot test also. Then the follow-up question will arise in your mind. Then will it really start the embedded Tomcat server also? Why? Because see, at the rate Spring Boot application, as soon as you start your main application, it will start the embedded Tomcat server also, right? So here what happens, whenever you add at the rate Spring Boot test, it will never start your embedded Tomcat server, yeah, by default. Okay. However, there are some other methods to even trigger embedded Tomcat server. Okay, but by default it will only trigger the whole application context, but does not start any embedded Tomcat server. Okay. So here, if you see, this particular Spring Boot test has a one attribute, that is web environment. Okay, web environment, it has four flavors. So one is mock, and the second one is random port, third one is defined port, and fourth one is none. So mock in the sense, it will load a whole web application context, and okay, and provides mock servlet environment. Okay, so if you want to choose this particular mock related flavor, so obviously here also embedded servlet containers will not start it, okay, but it will initiate your web application context in a mock servlet environment. So random random port in the sense here, you know this time, for example, if you write at the rate Spring Boot test in brackets, if you write web environment dot random underscore port, so then what it does internally do, it will start embedded Tomcat server, okay, at that particular server will run at some random port. Okay, so that's what it internally does, random underscore port, here you can say. So now defined underscore port in the sense, it's more or less similar to random port, but here the only difference is it used to run embedded Tomcat server at some defined port, whatever you specify. Okay, so none in the sense, see, none in the sense, it will never start embedded Tomcat server or whatever. So it will just loads an application context. Okay, uh, yeah, and but does not provide any servlet environment. Okay, it will just initiate, it's a plain plain whole application context will be initiated. That's it. Okay. So these are the four flavors. Okay. Now, if you want to know more about Spring Boot test, here so you can think about normal Spring test framework. So there, as I said, on top of the class, we used to write, context configuration, and in bracket we used to give a path of your configuration file, such as so for example, you may have some classes which are annotated with configuration, right? So those configuration files you can specify within context configuration, right? So now it will do a more or less a similar functionality. So now just it's kind of a replacement of that context configuration. Okay. So now whenever you are using a Spring Boot, Spring Boot framework, then obviously Spring Boot test is more or less a kind of a replacement of context configuration. Kind of usage in the Spring test framework. Okay. And after that, yeah, as I said, see, automatically searches for a Spring Boot configuration when nested configuration class is not used. Okay. And no explicit classes are specified, right? So, so as long as you don't keep any nested configuration, it will scan automatically until it finds the Spring Boot configuration. Right? Obviously, Spring Boot configuration is part of Spring Boot application, right? So then it will initiate that whole application context just by triggering that particular line, right, in the main method spring application dot run. So so by that way we will kick off application context, right? So after that, allows custom environment properties to be defined using the properties attribute, right? So yeah, so if you want to, if you want to point to some custom environment properties, so that also you can maintain your own properties file and you can point to that properties file. So that provision is also there, and yeah, provides support for different web environment modes, including the ability to start a fully running web server listening on a defined or random port. So just now I covered this point, right? So so we can kick off embedded Tomcat server or whatever web server, okay, at either defined port or random port. Okay, that this fourth point is the same one. Okay, and the fifth point is registers a test rest template or a web test client bean, okay, for use in web test, okay, that are using a fully running web server. Okay, in the case of integration testing, okay, if you have some REST template kind of thing to test your REST APIs, okay. So then then at that moment of time, okay, obviously you need to start your embedded Tomcat server, and with the help of this test REST template, you can invoke your REST API. So by that way, you can cross check your whole flow is working fine as expected or not. Okay. So these are all the benefits of writing at the rate Spring Boot test, and I mean internally it used to take care of all these features. Okay. So yeah, so this is a sample code. Whenever you try to write some integration testing code, okay, so something like this you need to write. So just define a class and just annotate with at the rate Spring Boot test, and in the bracket just you say like web environment dot, okay, web environment is equal to web environment dot random underscore port, or you can say some defined underscore port also, right? So and so here, exit local server port. Here, I just defined one variable, random server port. So at this port, it used to start that particular server. Okay, and after that, see here, REST template is there, right? So now, with the help of REST template, I am going to invoke my REST APIs. For example, here you can see this dot REST template dot get for object. Okay, so by that way, internally immediately the flow will invoke your REST API, and from there it is to jump to your service classes, from service classes to repository classes. So by that way, your whole flow will be tested as part of this integration testing, right? So now now the next question will arise. Okay, I'm keep on saying at the rate Spring Boot test will be used in the case of integration testing. Now, once we use this at the rate Spring Boot test annotation for unit testing, so this question will arise, right? So now unit testing. So when we go for unit testing, so if you want to test test your specific slice of your code. Okay, so for example, if you want to test only controller, or if you want to test only service class, or only repository class, okay, so then it doesn't make much sense to use at the rate spring boot test, right? Why? Because see, at the rate spring boot test will kick off a whole application context, right, which will take care of all at the rate, which will enable all auto configurations, which will take care of all beans instantiation, right? But when your focus is on only unit testing with respect to one single class, so why to initiate that whole application context? So can't we limit the launching of application context to up to some extent, some portion? Okay, so then you know so so the answer for that question is okay. um, so spring boot test, okay, so in brackets, for example, you can give something like this: classes is equal to, you can pass class 1 comma class 2 comma class 3. So what it does, it will scan only those classes whatever you are passing as an attribute to your at the spring boot test annotation. So right, so by that way, what it does internally, of course, it will initiate the application context, okay, and it will enable all auto configurations, but it will scan only the classes whatever you specify. Okay, so that is one solution. Okay, so by that way we can minimize the application context instantiation, okay, or initialization up to some extent. Okay, so this is one way, and the second way is okay. Spring Boot has given exclusive annotations for the case of unit testing purposes. Okay, so for example, what they thought is okay. Even why to use at the rate Spring Boot test, just by giving some specific classes. Okay, so they have introduced their own annotations, okay, for this purpose. So for example, at the WebMVC test, okay, this particular annotation is used in the case of controllers unit testing. So so by that way, what happens, it will initialize the application context with respect to your web application context. Okay, so what and all are required to trigger your controller unit test case, so only those essential part only will be taken care by that particular application context, that is web application context. So for example, so whenever you are writing some controller, obviously it used to take care of your controller, your controller advice to handle the exceptions, and HTTP message converters, okay, and the JSON paths. So all those required stuff only it will just take care of that those beans instantiation while kicking off the application context. Okay. Similarly, at the rate data JPA test, it will be used only in the case of writing some repository classes unit testing. Okay, so if you want to test the methods which you are written to test your DB methods, okay, then in that case just write this particular at the rate data JPA test. So obviously it will launch the application context which are which will take care of the beans instantiation which are required to test your DB methods only with respect to you know JPA framework. Okay. Uh, Yeah, so the third one, similarly at the rate web flux test, okay, at the rate JDBC test, okay, so just to test your JDBC method, okay. Similarly, data Mongo test. So, for example, if your Spring Boot application is interacting with the MongoDB, so then okay, you can use at the rate data Mongo test. And similarly, data Redis test, okay. So whenever your Spring Boot application is interacting with Redis cache, okay, so you can take care of this one. Similarly, data LDAP test, REST client test, and JOOQ test. Okay, so like that, the Spring Boot has given a number of exclusive annotations that which are quite essential to do the unit testing. So by that way, we can minimize the loading of application context, with respect to your unit testing, you know, criteria. Okay. So now This is at that WebMVC test, as I said just now. Okay, this is to test the Spring MVC controllers are working as expected or not, and you can use this at that WebMVC test annotation. Okay, so basically it will take care of only Spring MVC infrastructure and limit the scanned beans. For example, it will scan only at the rate controller, at the rate controller advice, at the rate JSON component filter, WebMVC configurer. So all those things. Okay, and at the time you can have only one controller for at the rate WebMVC test. Okay, so for each controller you need to annotate at the rate WebMVC test whenever you are writing a test classes. Okay, similarly, at the rate of MVC test, okay, will also auto configure this mock MVC one. So what is mock MVC in the sense? So with the help of mock MVC, we can fire a request to your REST API. So like in a real time. So it will mimic your actual web request. Okay, with the help of this mock MVC. So what does it mean? So for example, whenever you are firing an actual request from your postman or from your browser, so what it does internally, so obviously you will pass some JSON payload, and so the internally with the help of HTTP message converters, it will convert your JSON payload to the respective Java object, and from there it will validate Java object. Okay, and then the flow will slowly proceed to your further service layers like that, right? So now with the help of this mock MVC, it will do internally the whole stuff. I mean, it will fire a request just by passing some JSON payload or whatever, and the flow will reach to your controller. So all those firing of requests will be done with the help of this mock MVC. So that too without starting the HTTP server. Usually, how we can the important point here is without starting any server. Okay, it's not at all possible to fire a request. But here the beauty part is without starting a server, with the help of mock MVC, we are able to fire a request. Okay, that means we are doing some kind of a we are mimic the environment of the actual um, actual environment. Okay, so that is this one. So this is the sample code. At the sample code, you need to specify something like this, some controller dot class. Okay, so yeah, so as I said just now, we need to take the help of this mock MVC. Okay, object mapper in the sense, okay, if at all you want to convert JSON to object or object to JSON, so that's why we need to take care of object mapper, and similarly we need to we need to mock the subsequent layer, that is employee service. Okay, just for example, okay, just you need to do at that mock bin, so internally it will mock particular object and it will inject that particular mocked object into this particular field. Okay, and we need to just write some methods and annotate with at the rate test. Okay, there internally we used to do something mock mvc.perform. Okay, so there internally, if it is a post call, you need to pass a post call. Get call means get call. So that we will discuss after some time. Okay, so now the data JPA test, here you can see, as I said just some time before, this can be used if you want to test the JP applications. Okay, by default it will configure an in-memory embedded database, scan for entity classes. Okay, and configure the Spring Data JP repositories. Right now, if at all your focus is to test only your repository layer, okay, obviously um, to to test your repository layer methods, obviously it needs to interact with the database. Now the next immediately the question will arise, right, whether we will talk to our actual database or in-memory database. So for that purpose, now at the rate data JPA test, internally it will provide the embedded database. Of course we need to add the in-memory database related dependency. So if you are interested h2 means h2 you need to add, otherwise some db means db you need to add. Okay, whatever you add, so then accordingly it will kick off that embedded database, and it will automatically scan the right entity classes. Accordingly it will perform the DB operations. Okay, so and it will never scan all the rest of other layers, for example controller layer, service layer. Then it will least bothered about other layers. It will only instantiate the beans which are required for your JP applications, right? So, and one more important point is data JPA tests are transactional and roll back at the end of each test by default. example, in your test one, okay, you have created two records, okay, into your database, okay, and as soon as your test is executed, then immediately it will be rolled back. So that means your two inserted records will be deleted automatically. Okay, and again for your test two, it's kind of a fresh environment. Okay, so now, no, I don't want this type of tendency. Of course, there is a provision to switch off this transactional methodology. Okay, and similarly, yeah, so data JPA test may also inject a test entity manager bean, which provides an alternative to the standard JPA entity manager. So, in the JPA context, we have this entity manager, right? So, just to mimic that entity manager environment, they just provided at the rate of test entity manager. So, which will be used to process the data into your embedded database. Okay. So yeah, this is some sample code at the data JPA test is there, and here we are not going to mock anything. Here, happily, we just automate test entity manager and respective repository class, and we can do whatever we want with the DB methods. Okay. So yeah, this is one thing. And what is JUnit 4? So JUnit 4, uh, yeah. So if you are using a Spring Boot versions, okay, prior to 2.2.6, okay, until that version, okay, internally, whenever you are using a Spring Boot starter test, it used to have a JUnit 4 transitive dependency, okay, and so Spring Boot, what it has done, okay, between Spring Boot 2.2.6 and Spring Boot 2.4, okay, so you know. They just migrated from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5 Jupyter framework. Okay, so so Spring Boot 2.2.6 is the last version. Okay, which comes with JUnit 4. Okay, afterwards, okay, Spring Boot has has launched JUnit 5 framework instead of JUnit 4. However, they have also taken care of uh, JUnit 4 backward compatibility by adding a JUnit 4 vintage engine even in the along with the JUnit 5 framework. Okay, so that they just maintained both JUnit 5 and as well as JUnit 4 vintage engine till Spring Boot 2.4 version. Now after Spring Boot 2.4 version onwards, okay, they just eliminated that JUnit 4 vintage engine. Okay, they started maintaining only JUnit 5 Jupyter framework. Okay, from Spring Boot 2.4 onwards. Okay, so for example, if at all you want to run your JUnit 4 related test cases with Spring Boot 2.5 or 2.6 or advanced versions, okay, then you need to add JUnit 4 vintage engine related dependency explicitly once again. Why? Because you are not getting that backward compatibility after Spring Boot 2.4 onwards. Okay, so this is one thing. And one more point is, yeah, as I said, it's mandatory to have annotation at the rate run with Spring Runner.class. So whenever you're using the JUnit 4, so this is mandatory for your to annotate your test classes. Okay. Um, so this is one thing. And JUnit 5. So JUnit 5, as I said, uh, so um, so the first 2 points I already covered. Third point is, yeah, now till JUnit 4 we used to write at the rate run with Spring Runner dot class, okay, along with other annotations. Okay, so now in the JUnit 5 they just replaced that at the rate run with Spring Runner dot class with at the rate extend with Spring extension dot class. Okay, so now, if you are using a JUnit framework, now it's mandatory to have at the rate extend with Spring extension dot class. But what happened? Spring Boot 2.3 version onwards, even Spring Boot team thought, okay, even why the developers needs to annotate the test classes with at the rate extend with the Spring extension dot class. Okay, they started including this particular annotation as part of at the rate Spring Boot test annotation metadata and all other annotations which ends with the test. So that is a WebMVC test, data JPA test, JDBC test, all other annotations they have already included this extend with. So So from Spring Boot 2.3 version onwards, no need to include extend with the Spring extension dot class. It's enough to add only Spring Boot test or WebMVC test or data JPA test as per your need. Okay. So this is one thing. Okay. Next, what is mockbean versus spybean? Okay. So mockbean in the sense, earlier we used to have mock. Okay, so what's the difference between mock and mockbean? So we used to have a JUnit for mockito runner. So that means it will JUnit for internally, it will mock some particular particular service class or whatever class you are interested. It will mock particular object and it will include mocked object into your own class earlier. I mean, without the Spring framework. Okay, if at all you use only JUnit for framework. Okay. So afterwards, I mean, like we started using Spring with JUnit 4. So then we started using @run with our Spring runner.class, right? So now, obviously, if you are using Spring framework in the sense, definitely we will, we will load the application context, right? So loading application context in the sense what internally it will take care of all beans instantiation, right? And it will register with the application context, right? So now here there are two possibilities. Mockbean in the sense, if your bean is already instantiated and registered with your application context, then mockbean, what it does, it will replace your actual bean with the mockbean and it will inject into this particular field. So this is case one. Now case two is, okay, if this is not already instantiated as part of your application context, then in that case it will it will freshly do the mocking and it will inject that mocked bean into that particular field. So this is what mockbean. Okay. So so that's what I think I covered. Yeah. So the last point is, so the mocking object in the sense. So for example, you mocked one object. Okay, that object has some 5 methods. Okay. Now if you start invoking method one, method two, method three, all other methods of that using that particular mocked object, it will simply return null. Why? Because this is a empty object, it doesn't have anything. It's that is nothing but a mocked object. It will return null even if you try to invoke the methods of that particular mocked object class. Okay, so that's the important point. Now spybean. So what is spybean in the sense, there is a slight difference between mocked bean and spybean. Okay. So here spybean in the sense, this is not a kind of a empty object. This is a kind of a wrapper around the actual object. So this @spybean can be used in two ways. Okay, now the first case one is, okay, so even like for example, it will also you can also mock this particular object. Okay, and you can apply some mocking behavior and you can use like how you used to use with the help of mockbean. So this is case one. Now case two is, okay, let's assume you haven't applied any mocking behavior. Okay, for example, there is no mocking behavior. Okay, you just have some field with which is annotated with spybean. Now if you try to invoke any particular method of that particular object, okay, with the help of that variable dot that method one, so then it will not return null. Okay, it will return the actual value which that particular method returns. Okay, so that's the difference. So in the case of mock object, it will always return null. Why? Because that's a empty object. But here, if you don't apply a mocking behavior on in the case of spybean, then it will invoke the actual method and it will return the actual value what it returns. So this is the spybean. Okay, so so this is all a theory part. I mean, I just covered so far. Okay, which is quite essential to start writing your unit testing and integration testing. So I'm going to stop the video here itself. Now in the next video, I'm like we will write some coding. Okay, to write unit testing. Okay, so yeah, so if you really like my video, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.